2, 1. Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody today to the first collaboration between University of Central Florida and University of Florida Student Legal Services and our wonderful good and great friends at UF LGBTQ plus affairs, and in regard to LGBTQ rights at this point in time. And this has been prepared by Jamie Owen, who's joining us today, an attorney with UCF Student Legal Services, Tiffany Richards, the Director of LGBTQ plus Affairs at the University of Florida, as well as myself, Lane Prebor, working at Student Legal Services for about 9 years now. We also want to give a special thanks and shout out today to our good friends at UFMCDA, UF LGBTQ plus Affairs, UF Student Government, and Ryan Gavin in particular at UF Student Government for promoting this event for us. And we are recording today. I just want to let everyone know that if you feel that you're comfortable talking, feel free to join in, but the speaker probably will be recognized on Zoom. It will be captured at that point. If there's any commentary questions, you can also enter them in the chat box or wait until the very end. We have a question and answer session. So without further ado, just a quick disclaimer here. The information that's presented is educational in nature. It's not intended to constitute legal advice and is certainly not a substitute for consulting a student legal services attorney regarding one's case. And remember that the information presented is that of student legal services only, not necessarily reflective of the official policy or position of UF. Should probably also put UCF as well in there, right, Jamie?
Yes.
Yes, and the UF Board of Trustees, and as far as that goes as well for UCF. The Board of Governors is the same for both of our fine institutions, for the State University System of Florida or the state of Florida. And any opinions expressed by the participants are solely their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Student Legal Services or the above entities. We are attorneys. I have to get this little legal disclaimer in there. We also want you to realize that you're certainly welcome to contact us, and certainly welcome also to contact LGBTQ plus in regard to any specific matter. We all work together here. We all are in it to make sure that students' rights are protected. Also realize that every situation is unique, and we recommend that you speak with a specialist about your specific issues. If you need to contact us here at the university, this is our website here, studentlegalservices.ufl.edu. You can also put in, if you want to put in Google, free attorneys at UF, and we should be the first thing that pops up on that. Okay, and I'm going to just very briefly, Jamie, before we get started here, would you mind just doing a brief introduction about yourself for us?
Okay.
And I'll probably allow Tiffany to do the same thing.
Okay, so my name is Jamie Owen. I'm, again, one of the attorneys actually at UCF Student Legal Services. UF and UCF are the only two institutions with student legal services in the state of Florida. FAMU has a program, but it's not quite the same as the Student Legal Services Office. And I have an interest in this area and did some similar presentations, and Lane and I were talking about him, and he asked if I'd come over and do the same for you today. I am not a Supreme Court scholar. If you want something really esoteric and breaking down all, 56 million pages of Justice Alito's dissent, at least it feels like that many pages, I am not the person for that, but I am the person when I hear these things, I can think about how is it going to impact my clients, my students, and students more in general here in Florida and in the area as far as going forward.
Thank you. And Tiffany, thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you from our constitutional legal scholar, Jamie. And also, Tiffany, could you give us a brief introduction as well to LGBTQ plus at the university?
So hi everyone, my name is Clayton Richards, and I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. And LGBTQ plus affairs at the University of Florida, we really strive to create a welcoming and affirming space for students. And we also work with students through our educational and social programming to help them develop and have access to resources and different engagements and opportunities to be successful during their time at UF. And so this is just one of the offerings that we have, where we felt that it was really important to have this breakdown of the status of LGBTQ rights, especially after Bostock, and knowing that a lot of our students are going to go on into, after they graduate, into the workplace, into a world where they need to kind of be aware of what protections exist and what rights they have to fall back on. And so this is sort of one of the types of events and programming that we offer for students. And so I'm really gracious and grateful to Jamie and Lane for coming and pulling this presentation together so our students can be more informed of their rights and their protections and basically where to seek information in legal services.
Wow, thank you so much. A wonderful introduction on both of you. And I'm just also going to introduce very briefly my colleague. I'm joined today by Alicia Tebeg, who's been working at Student Legal Services a few more years than me. That's fair enough to say, Alicia. Yeah, thank you. We won't get into that. Okay, getting into our presentation today, LGBTQ plus rights post-Bostock. And Jamie, can you give us a little bit of information about your services?
So if someone ends up coming to UCF or is enrolled in classes at UCF, we do provide free legal assistance for nights. And just the same as UF does. And I think we do a lot of the exact same things. You'll notice here on this list that we are not employment law specialists. So I'm going to be talking about employment law today. We do some basic employment things, but we don't do civil rights cases. They're really complex, but we do help a student if they've experienced something like this to kind of like know where they're at, know what they should be looking to get, and their timelines. And we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit more later. I don't handle claims against the university or the state of Florida. We don't do student versus student. But we do a lot of stuff with like landlords and all the other sort of stuff that I know that UF does as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you also do bankruptcy, which is
Yes.
interesting to us. We do not do bankruptcy cases in-house.
We don't do a lot of them. A lot of students really just don't need them. But if that were something that someone were having credit issues with, I know you can come talk. If you're a UCF student, you come talk to us. And I know if you're a Gator, you can go talk to UF and they'll be able to point you in the right direction.
Thank you. And I can say the first time I think Jamie and I met was a dissolution of marriage divorce case, I believe. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah.
We'll say a few years ago, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jamie.
It was probably about the time because I think both of us started in student legal services around the same time. So I represented one person, and then I heard from Lane, and Lane was talking to the other spouse, and so it was a UCF student versus UF student, but uncontested. We were just getting the paperwork done. So
thank you. And I always want to give a special shout out to Jamie because she was the one attorney that said, "Oh, Lane, would you like to, or do you want me to prepare the paperwork?" That's the only time. And I was like, well, Jamie, if you have a little bit of time, I wouldn't mind for you to prepare all that. Thank you so much, Jamie. I do owe you another one for that one. I tried to remove as much orange and blue for Jamie's benefit today throughout this PowerPoint. A little bit about our office. We've been in existence since 1977. We are one of the first student legal service programs, grew out of the student rights movements of the 60s and 70s. We've helped many, I'm just going to guess, tens of thousands of students since that time. Obviously, the services have been needed. We are funded by your student government activity and service fees. We're located in room 3500 of the Rights Union. Although I have to say right now, we're not accepting walk-in appointments. You can call us. We'll give you the contact information a little bit later here. And this is the contact information. Again, 3500 Rights Union, but please don't come in person right now because of coronavirus. You can contact us at 352-392-5297, or old school, if you use the alphanumeric keypad, 392-LAWS. You can also contact us at studentlegalservices.ufl.edu and apply directly there for services. And you can email us as well at sls@ufsa.ufl.edu. And we will have this program available, online, and we'll give a link to that in just a minute. In terms of what we do, just contrasting it with Jamie's office, basically pretty much the same. Landlord-tenant cases are obviously a huge percentage of what we're doing right now, particularly during coronavirus. People do not want to pay for an apartment that they're not living in. Name changes as well, removing criminal records for background checks. Don't worry, our students are very nice people. They're usually very low-level misdemeanors, underage possession of alcohol and possession of marijuana sometimes. Dissolution of marriage, like we talked about, divorces and step-parent adoptions. Other assistance areas that we do: criminal charges, traffic citations, insurance, property damage, powers of attorneys, living wills, and healthcare surrogates. Quick shout out for that. We really want to get our students, particularly during the coronavirus, please execute these forms. It makes life so much easier if they're available. And our forms track Shan's at UF language. So if anything does happen, most of our students, knock on wood, of course, live in close proximity to Shan's and get medical services there. We also do notaries. Same thing applies. Please contact us, okay? Just don't show up right now, but we'll be happy to try to fit you into our schedule. Gosh, a quick outline here just to present. I'm always like one of those things. Jamie had put this together, and thank you. I think you did this on the initial email when we were discussing. I said, you've already fleshed it out pretty much.
I did a similar presentation for our UCF students, so I just kind of was able to port it over for you guys. So
great. Thank you so much, Jamie. Shall I turn it over to you at this point?
Yeah, that's fine. So we're really just going to talk today a little bit about Bostock. We're going to talk a little bit about where we were, what Bostock said, and then what it means. And there's going to be a lot of question marks and gray areas because we don't know yet. It just happened. We are seeing some stuff happen. There's a lot of theorizing. There's a lot of potential change going on in the legal system with the Supreme Court, and we're in an election cycle, and those things have impacts. So we really don't know where things necessarily are going to go. But we do know some things, and that's what we want to try to tell you as much as we do know, so that we can go ahead and arm you when you go out into the working world, either as a working student or getting, your fabulous career where you're going to make lots of money. If you want to, the next slide, please. Where were we before Bostock? So there was no nationwide law that protected sexual orientation or gender identity in employment, housing, etc. So if you were gay in a lot of places, you could be fired for being gay. If you were transgender in a lot of places, you could be denied housing. And that is still the case, that there is no nationwide law. Some states and municipalities had laws, but they varied, and many had exceptions. So I know in Alachua, I believe you guys had a non-discrimination ordinance, which is still on the books. We had the same thing in Orange County, where UCF is located, Orlando. But it had a lot of exceptions. So for example, UCF is a state entity. So the county's ordinance could not apply to UCF. That's one exception. We're also right on the border between two counties, so you literally could cross the street and be in a county, Seminole County, where there is no protection. So, it was kind of haphazard with the way that protections are going. There were some states that statewide had protections. And then there were some circumstances where there had been some precedent and some case law developed that might protect some people in the community. So there had been a line of cases that talked about sex stereotyping. So if you were a woman who didn't wear makeup and wore pantsuits and cursed like a sailor and were very assertive and aggressive, and you were discriminated against because you did not meet the typical feminine ideal, or whatever that means, they said that yes, that was illegal discrimination because of sex under Title VII, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute, in the Price Waterhouse case. And then they said in Cal that it could be male on male discrimination. So there was a gentleman who was more had some traits that were considered to be more feminine and was being harassed at work. And they said, yeah, that's the sort of discrimination that's also going to be covered, even though he wasn't being harassed by the opposite sex, he was being harassed by other men. And then I kind of talked about, there's been in the last 20 years a number of cases, I don't probably have to tell folks, but of things happening to the LGBTQ community. And it really kind of started more contemporary, in this 20-year period with Lawrence v. Texas. That's when they took sodomy laws and said that was like an impermissible invasion into privacy to criminalize same-sex sexual activity that was private. Windsor got rid of the Defense of Marriage Act, which on this federal level defined marriage as being between a man and a woman. So people were getting married in like the state of New York or Massachusetts, and then for their state purposes in those states, they were spouses, but when they had to file income tax, they were having to file as single, which is a less favorable tax treatment. The best tax treatment by the federal government is being married filing jointly, because they want to encourage families or whatever they say they want to do. And so that took that off. And then, Oberfell legalized same-sex marriage. Is a constitutional matter under the Constitution. So,
thank you, Jamie. And that's kind of the bright line, right? In 2015, across the United States, right, that became the law. And was it only a few states before then?
It was a lot of states. Like I remember when Massachusetts did it, and it was like, oh, wow, really big outlier. And then it became like New York, and a lot of the places we think of, and even like when I was in law school a while ago, in the mid 2000s, I was in a class, and my class was taught by a Lambda Legal attorney. Lambda Legal is a nationwide advocacy organization for LGBTQ folks, and they do a lot of litigation, and they've been involved in a lot of this litigation. She was bringing a case under Iowa's Constitution, and so Iowa had same-sex marriage, and they were trying to do it here in Florida, and all sorts of other places. And
thank you. It was kind of a hodgepodge, right?
So I don't know if you encountered this, but we definitely had seen this where some of our students had gotten married, and California or someplace else, and then they came back to Florida and they wanted to get a divorce, and you couldn't really get that here because our courts don't recognize, Florida didn't recognize the marriage. So it was a lot of really interesting legal things going on. California was putting like special laws into place where if you got married there, you could file for divorce there, even though you didn't live there, which is not the norm. And so it was a big mess. So it's been, it was when Oberfell happened, and then it became the law of the land, so to speak. It definitely made it easier. But when these court cases happen, it doesn't necessarily take the laws off the books. So I think even like Florida might even still have its sodomy law on the books, even though it's unenforceable. So if for some reason, I think a lot of people are concerned that if things change in the Supreme Court and the same-sex marriage case comes back, and I'm again not a Supreme Court scholar, I don't have a crystal ball, no tarot, nothing here that's going to give me any insight into the future. They worry about that because we still have a constitutional amendment here in Florida that defines marriage is between a man and woman, and all of those things. So it's it's always interesting. So I think like a lot of people in light of Bostock and we'll get there is, even though we have the Supreme Court case, do we still need to have legislation? Do we still need to have these ordinances? I don't know. That's a good question.
Right. None of us have a crystal ball, right?
Yes,
No.
yes.
Yeah.
So on June 15th, things changed. I mean, I had done a presentation for trans students with our LGBTQ plus services at UCF in May, and I talked about how these cases were in front of the Supreme Court, and I tried to be optimistic, but I have to tell you, I was not sure how this case was going to go. Now, I hadn't been following it very closely, but I don't know if it was just like 2020 getting to me or whatever. I have to say I was a little bit pleasantly surprised at the outcome for my clients, and just kind of give you a little bit of background on the case and what the case was about. We call it Bostock, probably because Mr. Bostock's name becomes first in the alphabet. But it actually was 3 cases combined into one. So it was 2 sexual orientation cases, the one involving Mr. Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. Mr. Bostock did not win his case at the trial court level. They said, no, Title VII does not cover sexual orientation, and that got appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. There was Mr. Zarda, an Altitu Express case. He actually did win his case at the trial court level, and it was appealed, and it eventually went to the Supreme Court. Mr. Zarda unfortunately passed away prior to the decision being made, but his estate continued on with the case. These cases started back in the early 2000s, so cases take years and years and years to go through all the levels and get to the Supreme Court. And then there was one gender identity case, which is the Harris Funeral Homes versus the EEOC and Amy Stevens. Miss Stevens also did pass away earlier this year before the case was announced, unfortunately, but her estate did continue it on. These cases all focused on Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prohibited employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and or national origin. Justice Gorsuch, perhaps a little bit surprising, but not really surprising when you read the decision, I guess, penned the opinion of the court. He was joined by Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Ginsburg, rest in peace, Justice Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan in a 6-3 decision. I don't think a lot of people in their crystal ball would have maybe have thought those things. What goes on. It's kind of funny that a lot of these things always come out in June, and that's Pride Month, but it just happens to be the way the cycle goes with the Supreme Court. So currently in October, this is the time of year when people argue in front of the court on different cases, and then they go into conference and they think about it, and then their clerks write the opinions, and they go through multiple drafts, and then eventually they get announced in May and June typically, and the more controversial decisions or the more impactful decisions tend to come at the very end of the term in June. So Bostock determined that Title VII's because of sex language includes sexual orientation and gender identity. Their reasoning for that really is looking at because of sex and really focusing on sex. The way that they think about it is maybe a little old school for our understanding. Now, when we are talking about legal stuff is always like 4 or 5 steps behind the way that we as a society and an accepting society thinks about things. So they think of it as biological sex, which we know scientifically is way more complicated than male female that we tend to divide it upon. But that's kind of where it is. So it was really looking at like if my employee comes in on Monday and says, hey, I married Bill over the weekend, and you fire Mike, and you give Susan a few days off to celebrate it, how could it not be because of Mike's sex? How could it not be because Mike is male? And also with with gender identity, how can it not be because of biological sex or sex determined at birth that you would fire someone who transitions? So it's really, they looked at it in a very textual way. They didn't decide, we're very careful not to decide some of these other things, and in fact they can't. The court can only make a decision on what's put in front of them, but they were very careful to not say that it applies to more than Title VII, but there's lots of arguments that it does. We'll get there in a moment. And they also left the door open in Title VII and sex discrimination. There still are things like, can you have gender dress codes? Can you have, the whole restroom question, which gets really complicated. I don't think it's that complicated for me personally, and but in a more global sense can get really complicated. Lots of people have lots of feelings. And then, religious exemptions. And so because the door kind of was open for that, we're really not sure how that's going to look. So we have this decision from Bostock that says that sexual orientation and gender identity are protected because of sex, and you cannot fire somebody because of those reasons. But the contours of that are not yet figured out. So to talk a little bit about the impacts of Bostock, it's going to be very interesting. There are 3 other laws that use the exact same because of sex language that this decision focused so heavily upon. Like, this decision is really textual. The reason why it's looking at the text and why that was a winning argument, and the reason why it's that is because there's always like this conflict between the court looking at the text of the law but not legislating, not taking the place of what the legislature should do. So that's really the way they were looking at it, and that's the way that they saw it, is that these things were definitely because of biological sex. So Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972 has this language, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Fair Housing Act. There have been at least 2, I think way more, pending Title IX cases that we're talking about transgender students that have already cited Bostock in their decision to side with the transgender students. One of those cases comes from Florida. It was in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the Court of Appeals that covers Florida and Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, I think. And that came out of St. Johns County. That's the plaintiff in that case is actually a UCF student now, but was a high school student in St. John's at the time. And so it's already having impact on these other things. I have looked, and I'm not saying that they're not out there, but at least not that I could find in using my Google foo. I could not find any fair housing or equal credit opportunity acts cases yet that involve these issues. I'm sure they'll be coming at some point in time. But there's lots and lots and lots of commentary out there by people saying, like, hey, we need to look at this, people who do housing work, or people who do other sorts of work, like, hey, you need to look at this and you need to be prepared to, maybe we should make some changes in anticipation of these things coming down the pipe, or we really think that these are arguments that are going to go forward. So it's going to be very interesting. Of course, the courts can't make decisions on those areas until a case comes in front of them. And I don't know if there's any in progress, but for a case to get back to the Supreme Court, I don't know how many years it would take from now until then. Everything right now is slowed down due to COVID. It would take to get there, but it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see how that plays out over the following years.
I remember, Jamie, in our brief discussion before, you were talking about it's, when someone is accused of discrimination, it's not, of course, they always deny and say, no, that we didn't mean to be discriminatory. But you were saying you have to look at the practices, right? Kind of behind it, and you look for a pattern of conduct, right? And what you're saying, probably on the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and Fair Housing Act, we'll be looking. In fact, in some way, I think you're kind of saying it's going to be inevitable, right?
I think so. I mean, but you have to have the right case. Some of these cases are hard, and I think if you want to go one more slide, Lane, I think it kind of start to talk on maybe it's 2 slides, but that's okay.
2 slides, okay.
I'll touch on it now,
Okay.
And then I'll refer back to we go up there.
Let me go back.
Way back.
Okay, way back.
I think it's all these discrimination cases, and prior to my life at UCF, and I've been at UCF a really long time now, I did a little bit of disability discrimination work. And it's really hard to know, like in an employment case, if you're not hired due to being a member of a protected class. So, for example, when I was in law school and I was interviewing for jobs, my name's Jamie. Now I think we tend to think of that as being a very female gendered name, but when I was growing up in the 80s, everything that was Jamie was for boys. So I was getting misgendered a lot in that process, and people would be very surprised when they talked to me, and then afterwards I wouldn't get extended an offer. So there always was in the back of my mind, is it because they found out that I was female? The legal profession is still more men than women. It's probably like the only profession that's like that, or one of the few. I guess I won't say the only, because I know there's plenty of others, especially in the tech field, but it's one of the few that are still like that. Even in law school, it still is, tends to be more men than women, but I think that's changing. So it was hard to know, is it because I didn't vibe with the firm and they didn't vibe with me, that they have a better candidate, or is it because they found out I was female? So I didn't know. I mean, it could have been I didn't get hired because of a discriminatory reason. But because they didn't tell me, it's like, oh, because you're a woman, how would I know that? Now, sometimes employers are stupid and they will say that, or sometimes you'll get to the end of an employment process. So let's say that I can very easily see something like this happening, that I have a client, this is a made up scenario. I have a client who has transitioned, who passes, who has gotten all of their legal documents in a new name, has changed their gender on everything, gets an offer contingent upon a background check. And that background check, because a lot of times a name change, at least here in Florida, is a public record, or for some other reason might show that there had been a name change. And it became very obvious that that person had transitioned and the offer was withdrawn, then it might be easier to show. But if it's just in a, like, you got an interview and you don't know how many, a handful of other people they might be interviewing for that position, or you applied for credit, you don't know if it's because of your gender identity that you got a worse interest rate or got denied for credit. It can be really hard to know that was what was going on. So sometimes you have to, there are entities out there at the federal level that can look at it a little bit more globally, but it can be hard. Like, I think it, disparate impact cases are hard cases, and I'll just leave it at that. But it can be really hard to know that you were discriminated against. On the other hand, there are really dumb employers that tell you, and that's basically the scenarios that happened in all three of the cases that ended up in front of the Supreme Court. Was that at least in one of the cases it was very explicit, and the other two cases it was pretty obvious. So there's kind of that. So as I was kind of saying earlier, cases are going to come to flesh it out. We don't really know. Is it going to be, even if you haven't gotten all of your legal name changed yet and don't have all your documents ready, is your employer still going to be required to give you an email address and your preferred name and use your correct pronouns? I don't know. I would argue yes. If I were general counsel, and I'm not general counsel for anybody, I don't speak for UCF or anything like that. I don't make general counsel money.
We won't hold you to that, Jamie, right?
Yes.
On top of everything else.
No, thankfully, I have the privilege of working for students, and that's kind of the fun lane to be in.
Exactly.
Yep. So I don't speak for any of those entities, but if I did, I'd be like, we need to be looking at this issue very carefully and looking at compliance, because we're worried about that. Employment is still at will in Florida. At will employment sometimes gets confused with right to work employment. So at will means that you can be fired or quit at any time. Even if you have an employment contract, a lot of times that employment contract, or at least the ones that I tend to review in our office on occasion, will still say your employment is still at will. You still can quit at any time and we can fire you at any time. Usually only if you're under a collective bargaining agreement as a member of the union, it might be a little bit different. Even if you're a state employee, you have a few more rights, but not many. If you're a government employee, it still pretty much ends up being at will employment. Right to work is sometimes confused. That just means that they can't make you join a union as a condition of your employment. We are a right to work state here in Florida. Most states, I believe, are now. So you might have the option of joining a union, you might not. I think this might have been in the news quite a bit recently, as you've with unions and being able to let people go and not let people go with Disney. So Disney has some cast members, as they are called, under a collective bargaining agreement because they're members of the union. I know there's a Teamsters there and probably some others. And then there's plenty of employees there who are not members of the union. And I think everybody who was not part of the union pretty much, were part of the ones that were let go, and still even some union members were. So I know there's been some news about that lately. But being a union member is not very common. Here in Florida and some other states, it might be more common. If you think you've been discriminated against at work, you have one of the shortest time frames in which to do anything about it, which is 180 days to file a complaint with the EEOC or your state agency. I would say go with the EEOC. Really, you probably should talk to an attorney at that point. If you fail to do that within 180 days of the last bad thing that the employer did, you may not be able to bring a case. So you need to do it. And document everything. Like if you're kind of in a situation, and this really, I do this in everything. If you're having a billing dispute, if you're just like in a situation, you kind of know, you get that feeling like something's not right. Get a calendar, a legal pad. When something happens, jot down the date, the time, who said what, when, where, whatever. It's so helpful. In the long run, if you're trying to build a case to have all of that, it potentially could be used as evidence to help you testify as everything that happened. If you do it contemporaneously every single time, it's just a big help. And I know if you're going through a situation, this is very traumatic we know trauma has an issue, does things to your brain. So the best way you can do to, make sure that you have everything together as best you can is to keep a record, document it. And like I said, it doesn't have to be formal, but try to keep it all in one place, and try to keep it as complete as you can. And the
Thank you.
next one.
Yeah, great advice.
All right, coming out at work. I am not going to tell anybody they need to come out at work. I'm not going to tell anybody they need to stay in the closet. I'm not going to tell you to do anything in between. It really depends on your individual situation, your work environment. My husband works in tech, and there's openly trans people there, and it's very open, and they have a very open culture. But I know that that is not the same in every situation. And some situations you feel more comfortable in than others. I have friends who are not out at work, maybe to like close confidence, but or if asked they'll say yes, but they don't advertise it either. I don't know at UF, but I know at UCF sometimes career services has partnered with Out and Equal. It's a nationwide organization that talks about and provides advocacy and support for people being out at work, and they have a lot of really great resources. They just had their annual conference. They've had their annual conference here in Orlando before in the past. They actually happened to be at Disney, and they were there, which was interesting. And so they provide a lot of good support, and you can get some information from them. And I always try to remember that not every wrong act will be provable as illegal discrimination. So a lot of times it has to be multiple things. They can't just have done it one time, with the exception of the N-word. The N-word is considered racial discrimination once. But besides that, it usually has to be like a pattern in practice. So if it's just once, it might not be illegal discrimination. A lot of things you might suspect that they're motivated by, not nice things or illegal things, but it might be hard to prove that they are. A lot of times what you'll have is like, I came, like I said about Mike coming in saying he married Bill over the weekend and was fired for that. And he might go, well, it was obviously because I'm gay, and they're going, no, it's because you were late that morning and you've been late 8 times and we're letting you go. And then you have to say, no, that's a pretense. It actually was because I'm gay. So those things can be tough, and it's going to be a factual decision, and if whoever the finder of fact is, whether it's a jury or a judge, deciding with that. And kind of like I mentioned earlier, that if you're trans, and even if you get your name change done and your gender marker change, some states easier than others, you still could be outed by a background check at work. HR would be seeing that, so hopefully they would be handling that in a professional manner. But we know sometimes things don't work out. We're talking about people, and people have their biases. And no matter what the law says, sometimes those things still come out. So, I always say research where you're going. You're going to do that anyway. You want to find the best employer that you can anyway, making the most amount of money. So research the culture environment's important too. In fact, I think the culture environment sometimes is the most important thing when you're at a job. So I say that for that's worth. We do recommend getting your name changed and your gender marker changed if you can. We understand it can be expensive, not terribly time consuming, though things are taking longer due to COVID. But that's kind of where things are. And then I think the next slide is just questions.
Hey, Davey, I had a quick question.
Okay.
About this, and it was in regard, you're talking about HR. We actually have an ombuds office at the University of Florida with Ron Anderson, and this is something that we had found out in terms of our employment committee training. we can go to the ombuds, which is considered kind of a neutral party, and meet with them rather than directly go to HR, if that makes sense. Where, you know, some people worry about the escalation effect, you know, of reporting to HR. Is there anything like that at UCF?
Yes, we have an ombuds as well. And yes, that's a great resource. They call themselves like the Google at UCF. So they don't solve problems as much as maybe we think when you say ombuds. At other organizations do, but like if a student needs information, or if like I needed information, I once had a HR question, and I went directly to HR, but maybe it would have been easier to go to the ombuds to find out the answer for. I wasn't still really satisfied with the answer, but I got the answer. It can be to help you find those answers, and like maybe to get you to the right person to talk to. And so, obviously if someone is having those issues, I know UCF has a non-discrimination policy, and I'm sure UF does as well. And I know that our LGBTQ services is there to help students. They're under our social justice and advocacy, so we have like a whole group of organizations that are there to help students who are considered part of protected classes, or somehow marginalized, and really can help them deal with that. There's a whole thing at UCF to report bias incidents. So there's all sorts of resources on campus as a student. We're fortunate in that if you wanted to become employed at at the respective organizations afterwards, you still do have that. But out in the private world, you might not find that as much. There'll be the HR department, but word of mouth is a really good, if it's a large employer, if you have friends or other people in the community, who work there, it's always a good way to kind of test the environment. Hopefully you'll get some good, truthful information to help you make your best decisions.
Right.
Thank you for that, Jamie. I had a few questions that I've been jotting down. I guess the first one is you mentioned that the name change is public record. Is there anything that like a trans person can do in terms of sealing that, or in terms of adding an extra layer? I guess I'm not clear as to like when folks do like background checks and credit checks and stuff like that, like.
So it's kind of might depend on the county and how the county does it as to how it's gonna show up. It's considered a public record. Now, Florida has a very expansive public records law. I'm sure, as you know, as a state employee, your emails can be subject to ours can't as attorneys if it's client work, but otherwise, you can get emails and stuff like that. There are a very limited set of circumstances in which a person can ask for it to be sealed. So maybe if they've been a victim of domestic violence or some other reasons they may ask, our courts are real reluctant to do it. So it can show up, and it can show up with your credit, like names that you're formally known by. I know when I look at my credit report, I tend to use my middle initial when I do stuff, but sometimes it'll say Jamie Owen, Jamie L. Owen, Jamie Lynn Owen, my full name. I didn't change my name when I got married or for any other reason. But so I haven't seen that show up like that, but it is public record. It's, just like you get a divorce, you have an eviction, pretty much everything here is very open. Now, some courts will only put the old name, so the dead name on there. So it can be harder to find unless people knew your dead name. But one of our counties basically does the name change, like dead name versus new name. So, that's kind of on there and a little bit easier to find. I don't like it that way, but it is what it is, unfortunately.
So there's no like real guidance in terms of what folks can do. I guess I'm just surprised to hear that all that stuff would be public record, like even evictions, like that.
Yep. Oh, you'd be surprised what I can find out about somebody on public records. I look up landlords sometimes and I'm like, oh, yeah, we just have very expansive public records. Now, if you move to a different state, I think I was looking at Texas the other day for some reason. I think I was looking for a student for a birth certificate. I saw like you can just request that it be sealed in that state. So, if you're planning to move for work or something, and that's something you're very concerned about, but even then, I think it maybe possibly could still come up in a background check that if you're someone who's using the same, social, and it was one name and then another name, it's just possible. I can't guarantee it won't, and I just want to make people aware that it could.
Does anyone else have any other questions before I?
No, Tiffany, have at it.
And so, as it relates to like Bostock and Title IX, are there any protections or guarantees then for folks to have access to gender inclusive housing on college campuses?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know how that's going to play out. So the only Title IX cases that I'm aware of currently are in high school. So the Gavin Grimm case actually has had a good decision because, that got shot down and then was working its way back up to the Supreme Court and may still go to the Supreme Court to do, to allow a trans person to use the correct bathroom. And that was the same situation for the one out of the state of Florida. I don't know of any at the university level yet. So I think that's going to be interesting. I've seen some issues with that even here where someone transitioned and was female to male, but it wasn't, and then their housing provider was like, you need to move because they hadn't consented to co-ed living, his cis female roommates. So it brings up all sorts of issues, and I'm going to be really interested to see what courts do with that, what the guidance is for that. And it'll be interesting. I've not really heard of any issues here, so I hope that everything is going very swimmingly and everybody's very happy with the way things are being handled. But it'll be interesting.
I think that's my last question. Are we touching on gender markers, or is that coming up?
I think, Lane, you put a couple slides in here at the end about name changes.
I did.
Do you have any questions too before we continue to the next section? Okay, that's.
No, I'm absolutely fine. That was an amazing presentation, and Jamie, thank you so much. That really, I wish I had that depth of knowledge. That's actually why I was attending today, right? Was to learn more. A lot of times we learn the practical things, which I'm going to get into here, but it's good to know the context, right? And it's very, very important. We've had so many important cases coming through, right? Particularly at the Supreme Court level, at the I was going to say at the federal level.
Yeah. And then people still wonder, like, well, do we still need to support ENDA, which is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and there's companion acts for all the other things too, for housing and that, and even at the state level here. So our representative, Carlos Guillermo Smith, he's not my representative, but he represents the UCF area. He's a UCF alum. Every year he's been in, he keeps proposing ENDA at the state level, and it never makes it out of committee. He's gotten closer, but it never makes it out of committee. There's a question, do we still want to support those acts? And I believe people who advocate for LGBTQ folks say yes, we need to make sure not only do we have this great decision for people the community so they have more protections, but we should codify it into law as well. So they're still encouraging people to keep up that energy for that fight. But yeah, what we actually do at Student Legal Services on a real practical level are these name changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to add in, a little bit of historical context as well. When I was in law school, Hawaii had talked about allowing
Mm-hmm.
same-sex marriages,
Mm-hmm.
going back in time. This is the 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
and had, had certainly discussed it. It didn't get the traction, necessarily needed, during those
Mm-mm.
years. But that was early discussed 1990s, and then later on, Florida was also, and I believe this may have been a little bit later 1990s, same-sex adoption, right?
Yeah.
Which, yeah,
So when I was in undergrad, in the early 2000s, this probably was like 2002, we had an ACLU attorney come in and talk about the case. And forgive me, I don't remember the names now. I barely remember the names of my own clients. But after this long, but there was a same-sex adoption case here in Florida that they were fighting. The one that really got some traction was a male same-sex couple that had been fostering long-term some HIV infected kids, and they were like the perfect couple to be doing that because the one was a nurse and they had the economic resources, and I don't think they ever won that case. Things are different now, but those kids are probably well beyond the age of 18 at this point.
right.
And I never thought at that time that well, first of all, we hardly ever talked about transgender folks at that time. And thankfully we are now. But that wasn't coming, with a lot of these things wasn't, they've been, obviously transgender folks have been around forever, but it just wasn't making those kinds of circles in the same way. And I didn't think we'd have gay marriage and same-sex marriage in all 50 states. I wasn't sure that happened in my lifetime at the rate it was going. So it's been a really interesting development. But things are not nobody really knows what's going to happen moving forward, if momentum will continue forward or whatever. So that's why I really urge students to try to get their name change and gender marker change sooner rather than later. And because once you have it, it's a lot harder for someone to take away than it is to stop you from getting in the first place. Depending on what state you're in, it can be harder to change your gender marker. What state you were born in, harder to change it than in other states. So the sooner you kind of get all your ducks in a row, I think the better. Though I do understand, there's a time when it's right for everybody, and also financially it can be a burden. So.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. Thank you so much. And
Mm-hmm.
a great segue right into the next
Mm-hmm.
section here. A little bit briefer, but it's taking everything, the context that Jamie's just given us and putting it into, I guess, the practical, right, application of it. And this was actually, the following slides were requested by, I'll give a quick shout out, it was UF Pride, as well as the Alachua Human Rights Coalition. We had put together a special presentation for them. Interesting story. When I was getting ready to do it, the fire alarm went off in the building here at the Rights Union, which Tiffany knows is not that unusual, unfortunately. So I had to rush downstairs, told everybody I would come back, but still I got to squeeze some of the slides in and gave them a little bit of information, and they were very thankful, and we're very thankful to them. This is assistance with name changes for transitioning individuals. This is something that we do in our office. I wanted to say not infrequently, in fact, frequently, okay, for transitioning individuals. And certainly feel free to refer students over to our office. We do all what we consider to be the heavy work, so to speak. We draft the documents that are needed in court, the petition, the affidavit of indigency, which can potentially waive the fees, okay, that can be, that the court will file. right now, Jamie, I'm guessing it's kind of probably across the board around $400 for the name changes.
Yeah, I think that's the base fee, and
Yeah.
then they charge you for the privilege of taking your money through the electronic system. So there's
Oh,
fees on
that's right.
that.
The
Yep.
fingerprints as
Yeah.
well.
Fingerprint
Exactly.
fees.
Finger.
So some counties will, here in Orange County, will waive the fee if you meet the statutory requirements. No problem. As long as I look at it and you look like you meet the requirements, they'll waive the fee. In Seminole County, I don't know how poor you have to be for them to waive the fee, because they almost will, at least from my experience, never waive it. So it can vary from county to county what they want to do, but I think Orange is a little bit more expensive, but they're all right around $400.
Thank you so much. So the affidavit of indigency, if you meet the requirements, I believe it's double the what is it, poverty line, I believe, for
200% of the level of poverty
yeah.
for your household size, under $2,500 of assets, liquid assets. And then if you own a car, which fortunately a lot of our students don't own their car, and for years, I drove hand-me-downs and the car was not in my name. It can't be worth more than $5,000. They do take a loan into consideration on that too. So.
Thank you. Yeah, so much. I know many of our students have met the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Just really helped out
Mm-hmm.
because it is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
The notice of related cases, permission to use email, and final judgment. We do everything, like I want to say, everything
Mm-hmm.
from the petition all the way through to the final judgment for you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some wonderful websites as well that will give you some information on this. The transsocial.org website, as well as translifeline.org.
Mm-hmm.
And entities to contact regarding a name change, we recommend once you get the name change done, after we process that part of it for you, that you get like copies from the clerk of court. And it's in a certain order here, and Jamie knows why, and Tiffany may well know why, for a reason. Okay, it's typically starting with Social Security because the driver's license is going to require, right, proof.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in that order. Voter registration is something that we added in, which is, according to my students, extremely important right now. In fact, I can tell you that I have at least 4 students that are waiting on filing for a name
Mm-hmm.
change until November 3rd. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, because we weren't sure, whether or not it could have been changed before then. UF Student Records, of course, UCF, we go for the same thing. The IRS, the VA Selective Service, insurance, bank accounts, credit cards, wills, healthcare documents. You don't have to memorize all of these. We have a list for you because we've already gone through this, okay, that we will provide. And I want to make sure, that I have the correct information on here. Changing the gender on a driver's license or ID card, birth certificate, we'll start with it first. On the driver's license, generally, you need to bring these items. Your current driver's license, it's $31.25, I believe, was the fee associated with the change on a driver's license. And I think I researched this pretty recently, so that should be right around that amount. And a letter from a medical physician, which has some specific requirements in it, right, Jamie, that we'll get into. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that. And Florida birth certificate laws, just that the Florida Administrative Code actually allows for amendments to the sex on a birth certificate with original certified or notarized supporting documentary evidence. One of those is a standard passport gender change letter as evidence. There's also a method to do it without that, an application to amend a Florida birth certificate, an affidavit of amendment of certificate of live birth, and that letter from a physician. This links to a sample letter, but we've also got it included in this PowerPoint. And if anybody has any questions, even if you're watching on YouTube later on, I'll give you a link to the PowerPoint, but I'll also, Student Legal Services, SLS at ufsa.ufl.edu. Feel free to email us, and we'll email you this PowerPoint with all the links in it. In terms of gender passport changes, this was actually done, and interestingly, the federal government was one of the first, I believe, Jamie, right, to allow.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Obama administration started allowing this process, and it really sparked kind of a probably not in every state, but at least for here in Florida and some other states, kind of I guess it was part of this whole movement to really be better about gender marker. So the reason why you can change your driver's license in Florida is because of your passport, because it used to be a lot harder to get your gender marker changed in Florida. But when the State Department did that, I think all 50 states pretty much to line up had to change it to the same standard, which is the treatment standard, that you're getting treatment from a medical provider, your physician, for transition care. And started allowing it to do that. And then just when Governor DeSantis, a little bit surprisingly, became governor. Kudos to him. His administration did change the standard. It had been like a surgical standard before. Now it's a treatment standard to actually get your birth certificate changed in Florida. But that is not the case in all 50 states. Some states are great. They let you just sign an affidavit saying what your gender is. Those states tend to have more than just the binary. And you can get it changed on your birth certificate. Colorado's one. Some states like Texas and Georgia require a court order, which Florida doesn't do. So it gets a lot more complicated. And in those cases, if you were born there, we strongly recommend getting a passport change, so you don't have to use your birth certificate, because it might be harder to get your birth certificate amended. Things are changing all the time, though. So if you wait long enough.
Well, that's a really good point, Jamie. We're Florida attorneys, right? And because of that, we're giving Florida-specific information. Well, the federal here, of course, it would work across the board, I believe, in regards to this. But in regards to the, you're right, the birth certificate, right, in Florida, as well as the driver's license, et cetera, is very Florida-specific. And what you just said, every state can be different. Probably is.
Yeah, just like marriage is defined at the state level, and sometimes, in the early days, you'd see the federal courts not wanting to get involved in what marriage was, because it's a state-defined thing. Birth certificates and vital statistics, that's all done at the state level. So it's all going to be based on that particular state's policies. I know some just because I've had clients that were born in those states. And one of the resources that Lane previously linked to in this presentation, Trans Equality, they have an ID document center, and you can pull up the state in which you were born and see what hoops you may have to jump through. Sometimes it's really easy and sometimes it's really hard. It's really just, that where you just happen, where mom and dad have, or mom was actually where mom was at the time that everything happened.
Thank you. Yeah, so much for that. And here's the sample, that magic letter that I kept emphasizing, it's got to follow some certain language. And I was sharing this with Jamie. This is what we call the slightly new and improved letter. And it has something that we've added in here as well, but has been requested, by certain entities, which is the DEA registration, or physician's DEA number, as well. Some of the doctor's letters that were linked to on some of the websites did not include that, but in an abundance of caution, we think that going, I don't want to say overboard, but providing that little bit of extra information just to be careful, if anybody has any questions about it, is a good idea.
It's I've not had any pushback on it yet from the DMV, but their memo that was issued actually lists that as a requirement of the letter. So I usually advise students to make sure that their physician puts it on there, but they don't require that at the nationwide level. But it's better just to get it. And then I usually say try to get, if your provider will provide you with a few originals, because you might have to mail one off the vital statistics, and who knows if you'll even get that back. Probably not. Just make sure you have a few copies.
Yeah, no, that's a very good advice on it. And it follows the specific language, like we were just talking about, doctor-patient relationship, and whose medical history you've reviewed and evaluated, the name of the patient here, and transition to, it is relatively binary, okay,
Mm-hmm.
on here, male and female. I won't put any judgment on that, but it is
Mm-hmm.
what it is. I declare under penalty of perjury. The nice thing about the bottom, though, is that it does not require the physician to have to get it notarized. So it's very simple to get done. I think Jamie's advice is perfect. If the physician is willing to do so, get several copies and get
Mm-hmm.
several originals, right,
Mm-hmm.
Jamie?
Yeah, because you'll have to probably sense, uh, I know for a little bit this summer, I'm not sure, right as of October, oh God, is it 22nd? I don't know what day it is. Corona time. It's just been hard to keep track, but you know, some of the Social Security offices weren't open, so you were having to mail stuff in, and there's no gender marker on your Social Security card, but people still recommend that you change it. It's the same physician's letter. If you can get multiple copies, now I do know some providers will charge, or at least this is what I've heard, the scuttlebutt. I'm not actually have seen it, but I would try to see if they'll work with you to do at least a couple originals, because if you get your passport done, there's a copy going with that. If you get your birth certificate done, there's a copy going with that. It's just so much different stuff that
And
you might need to more than one.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, those final judgments in court, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, very, very critical as well. Making
Mhm.
sure, right, that they're delivered to the entities. I think we recommend 4 to 5 copies.
Mhm.
It may not be a bad idea. Same thing for a doctor's letter, because you never know if it's going to get returned or not, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I usually tell students well, when we used to be able to go in person to do these name changes, I would
Back in the days, right?
back in the day, I would tell them to bring a 20, because cash, they don't charge you for using, and to get whatever a 20 bought you, which is usually 6 copies. And most students said that was, more than sufficient. I had done a few of these for some older folks that had a bit more complicated situation, like had multiple children who they wanted to get the birth certificate, so they needed more copies. But for your average, 18 to 25-year-old, and that's a student, 6 copies is probably more than sufficient. Um, just kind of get you started. But because things are having to be mailed a lot more, and we're not being able to do
Yep.
things face to face, you may want to err on the side of getting a few more copies. It's pretty easy to mail in for them here, to request them online, and they take the payment online. But again, you get charged all those little extra fees. So if you kind of do it all at once, it does save you, a few bucks, and that's a cup of coffee. So try to do that as much as you can.
Thank you.
Hmm.
This is a shameless plug to make
Hmm.
sure that all of our students, COVID-19 healthcare forms that I mentioned before, we think it's so important. And when I say shameless plug, this is something that we really believe in.
Hmm.
Please consider a durable power of attorney, a HIPAA form. Remember that if you're not necessarily related to the individual and you go to the hospital to try to get medical information about it, right, without you being listed on a HIPAA form, you may not be able to get that.
Hmm.
The living will, very important right now, describing what's going to happen to you, right, if you were to enter, for example, a comatose state. Healthcare surrogate, making sure that somebody can make those decisions if you're unable to do so, as well as the organ donation forms. The organ donation forms, most people know your ID cards and driver's licenses. They made that, possible as well.
Hmm.
Um, and oh,
I
go ahead.
have just a
Sorry.
quick thing to jump
Sure.
in real quick, Lane. If you are a transgender individual who, next of kin, so usually your parents are not supportive of your transition treatment, if something happens to you where you are unable to convey what you want to happen with your medical, it will go to your next of kin if you do not have one of these forms. So that may mean that your transition treatment is discontinued if they're the ones making medical decisions for you. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And presentation link. Oh gosh. Okay, I'm still waiting on it here. We will get that. I know posted by Ryan. I I put in the request for it. Hopefully that'll be out very, very soon. But the same information, if you do want to get a copy of it, just contact our office, Student Legal Services, 392-5297, or again, just look us up, okay, and contact us. I will get you a copy. If I have to do it personally, I will make sure a copy gets to you. Probably during the coronavirus days, it'll be via email, okay, for everybody. Workshop feedback, very important. There's a little Q code here. If you want to use it, you can actually go there and or you can click on this link as well for the SLS presentation evaluation. And we do read feedback. The one thing that I really appreciate is critical feedback. What did we do right? What can we improve? Okay, those two questions are included as well. And I think it was a wonderful presentation. The information for me, like I said, it really educated me as well on this. Let me turn now. Are there any questions about my portion or anything prior on here as well? Like I said, that was more practical, a little bit quicker, I think. It's just one of the many services that we offer. We've always been certainly had a very good working relationship with LGBTQ plus as well as MCDA, all of the members here. We're completely non-discriminatory. I always want to emphasize that, okay, as well. Everyone is welcome at our office. And any other questions at this point in time? If not, I'm tempted to knock off the recording thing, okay? And I want to thank everybody that attended today. Jamie, thank you again so much. Our first collaboration. And Tiffany, this is our actually first workshop collaboration as well. I know we've been discussing it as well. We've done other, workshops before and presentations, but this is our first together as well. So this is a real milestone for us, bringing us all three together, I think. All three offices. I'm very proud of this achievement. I can't wait. I'm probably going to mess up right here at the very end, right before I knock off the record button. But thank you both so much. I really, really do appreciate it. And for you to have given of your time so generously today means the world to us, okay, as well. The depth of knowledge. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to stop